This episode of What the Tech is brought to you by Slack. Slack is a messaging app which brings together all your team's communication into one place, making work simpler and more productive. Go to slack.com to learn more. Harry's. Stop messing around and get started shaving with Harry's today by claiming your free trial offer. $13 value for free, just covered shipping by going to harrys.com/whatthetech. Simple Contacts. An easy and convenient way to renew your contact lens prescription or reorder your contacts from anywhere within minutes. Get $30 off your contact lenses by visiting simplecontacts.com/Andrew and entering the promo code Andrew.
What the tech?
Everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Aaron. Of course, I'm joined by Mr. Paul Thrive. But where are you, Paul?
I'm in an undisclosed location that's in Chicago.
You're in Chicago for an event.
Right, called VeeamON. Veeam is one of our big partners, and last year the show was in New Orleans, you may recall.
Oh, yes, it was.
This year it's in Chicago.
Yeah, it's in Chicago. You've been a busy boy. You've been going all over the place. You were at Build last week, which we did not get a chance to do a show, which I want to talk about this week. Google I.O. also happened last week, which we did not talk about, which I want to talk about, and everything else happening. Obviously, there's a big announcement today from Microsoft, and that is the Surface Hub 2, which I want to touch on. And for the first time I looked at it, I said, you know what? This would be cool in my office.
Yeah, I think this is going to turn a lot of heads.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. A lot of praise regarding Build and Microsoft's direction last week, which I didn't talk about, and I really didn't want to do a show about Build without you. And
sure.
I know that the sponsors and the advertisers are probably going to be very upset with me, but I'd rather have the show, have you on and discuss it with you rather than just do it. Obviously, there's so much to cover. You're in Chicago till Thursday, correct? And then
through Thursday.
Maybe we could figure out something extra to do regarding this kind of topic, because a lot is moving, a lot is happening. My God, Google is taking over the planet. Skynet is happening. The robots have taken over. They're now ordering my Chinese food and setting up my hair appointments. So this is all crazy stuff happening, which I think this is the first giant leap for this technology, as far as
so you're referring to the Google Assistant Duplex feature. So the interesting thing about that, well, there are a number of interesting things.
Let's start the show. I want to get through. I want to because this is gonna be.
Oh right, we have a show to do.
I got so much feedback about this, which I was not surprised, but I was kind of surprised at the. We're kind of jaded when we look at this stuff.
Well, that's what I wanted to. Yeah, that's why I wanted to launch into that, because I also received a bunch of feedback about that thing from what I would call non-traditional sources.
Yeah,
but we get to that.
So I want to get to it and a whole lot more. But before we continue, I want to talk about our friends and a great service called Slack. And I have to tell you, Slack saved my rear end this week. Life is getting really busy for Andrew. 2 kids, and all the chaos of business, a very full-time job now. You guys have slowly seen the rise and fall of me as a human being. Right now, I'm trying to get myself back up and get organized. But with my job, I am the director of digital strategy and media, whatever you consider that to be. But sometimes I forget things. And I've been forgetting a lot more things recently because I'm so preoccupied with life, and things change and things happen. And I wanted to give my personal story about this. I've been implementing Slack in my day-to-day communication with different departments for a while now. As you guys know, Slack is a hub, a communication hub, where people could collaborate and lets you organize your team's work, and you could easily search for things. You could chat. You could drag and drop and share files and images and all this stuff. But the big problem is, for me personally, is I'm good with my department, but sometimes I forget to reach out to another department and let them know of a major event happening. Like, for example, this week we're having a huge Bitcoin convention in New York, and we kind of want to capitalize on this and invite these people to our establishment. And Andrew forgot to inform everybody that we're running a promotion and we're doing giveaways and things like that. But you know what? I did not forget to put it in Slack when I typed it up. So even though I forgot to call and let people know, they still were fully informed because I had shared this information amongst all the different teams. Because you could set, marketing team, an operations team, whatever it is. Also, you could get this on iOS, on Android, on desktop. It's easily syncable amongst all your different platforms. You could also incorporate it with Salesforce, Zendesk, Google Drive, over 1,000 applications. This is a very important tool that I use day to day. And if you are collaborating on projects, if you want to increase communication amongst your job and different people in your department, and even, listen, small businesses like myself, I use it with my team here. I got a very small team. By team, I mean my wife, the people doing shows, except for Paul. Paul's not on this. I don't want to bother him. And John and Suncast. I mean, this is a very easy platform to use. Go to slack.com, find out more where work happens. Go to slack.com. So, Paul, I want to start with Google I/O.
Okay.
I want to, there was obviously other things and other, I want to get your take on the whole event and summarize it. But this Google Assistant, the fact, and by the way, this was a demo, and they had a lot more examples on their website, more than, if you went to their blog posts, you could see all the different ones that they did. It wasn't just the Chinese food and the hair appointment. If this works the way that they are saying it is and the way it's going to, this is that weird, should they tell us we're talking to a robot? By
yes.
robot, I mean computer.
To answer the question, yes. And there are legal and maybe even moral implications to what they've done. But I believe Google has said post-keynote that in response to a question from a blogger or a journalist that they will be doing that. And this may become a legal requirement in certain places, so it would behoove them just to do that. But, this demo was fascinating for so many reasons. We had a family event over the weekend, and two family members asked me if I had seen this. It is a topic of discussion amongst normal people. But there's kind of a broader thing going on there too. I think, I was trying to think about the message that they're sending. I equated it to, if you think back to the early 1990s when the U.S. invaded Iraq, part of what happened with that invasion was that we showed the world, the United States, and the United States military in particular,
you and I,
what we had. You and Andrew and I got together to reveal some of the capabilities that the U.S. military had, which to that point had been secret, right? And so it was done very specifically to send a message, and you might remember some of those famous videos where the bunker bombs had the cameras on them and they would go right into the, right into a chimney or whatever. There was one famous one where Schwarzkopf was talking. It showed the guy driving over the bridge, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, here's the luckiest man in Iraq. And then the bridge blew up right after he got over it. And that in Russia and in other places at the time, they were like, oh, geez, look at that. That's we have some catching up to do here. And the Google event, in particular, that demo, I think served notice to anyone who's doing any form of AI or personal assistant technology, whatever, that Google is on the cusp of something very profound, from a functionality perspective. That demo was so impressive, and granted, it was a demo. They said it was a real phone call or a couple of real phone calls, and we have no way of knowing that. And I'm sure when the preview version of this comes out in the summer, it will be nowhere near as impressive as what we saw. But this is what they're working towards, this notion that someone can, on your behalf, not just do things in kind of an online sense, but actually have conversations with people where if you did not alert them to the fact that they were talking to a robot, they may not know. And
I mean, it's not just the conversation; it's a very human conversation in the sense that the uhs and the ums. And what was interesting is that certain things that you would expect it to say, like right, which is a normal thing, but it wasn't saying it was saying
Well, it was doing different variations of it, but it was a
different
very natural
variations of it.
speech pattern.
Very,
Right. It wasn't
very.
robotic voice, hello, this is the weather, it was very natural. And I think that was a big part of it. But also, he says, also to react normally to unexpected situations, right? The restaurant that can't make a reservation. And then to be able to handle that in a semi sophisticated fashion, and then ask about, well, what are the wait times? And if we came now, how long would we wait? That kind of thing. That second call was really interesting because the woman or the person on the other end of the phone had a harder time understanding the AI than was the reverse. They kept asking follow-up questions that had already been answered by the AI, and the AI just kind of handled it.
And handled it better than most people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think a lot of people would have gotten quite upset with that. I have a running gag about my inability to talk to anyone in a fast food restaurant, or when I call them on the phone to have food delivered. I have that exact same experience. I'll say something very specific, like, I want this item and I want it this way. And then they'll say, what item? And then I'll say this, and they say, so you want that normally? And I'm like, no, I want it. Like I just have this, it's just been a running thing with me.
It's frustrating, yeah.
And I think, an AI acting on my behalf or on the behalf of other angry people might not be such a bad idea, because they will handle those things much better than many human beings might.
Yeah, I get anxiety when my wife is ordering on the phone, because it's such a frustrating process. You got to repeat it 10 times. Your phone number needs to be repeated. I mean, I just get Google to do it from now on, But there is a weird problem here, because at what point is this? I mean, is this a moral thing? Is this an ethics thing? What kind of issue is this when you don't know? I mean, let's say I'm calling a store and I don't know that's a robot. I think that's a customer service person. And what does this do to the business of customer service and concierge and all these other things? This is the end of, customer service.
We've seen the beginnings of this. You'll get a phone call that's automated. It's actually a robot. You think it's a person. It's that thing. Oh, I dropped my headset. Sorry, I didn't hear you. The scam calls. And really what they're trying to do is elicit some word or words from you so that they can get it on a recording, and it seems like you agreed to something. That's really sophisticated in its own right. But of course, the thing that's really sophisticated about what Google demoed is this: it's an ongoing conversation, and it's going to adapt based on what's said. And these things target very specific scenarios. It's the way that Google presented it was very smart, because we can all appreciate what they were trying to say, which is that there are smaller businesses. You've done this. You search for a business on the web that you know the business, where it is. Yeah. They don't actually have a website.
No.
And so when you Google them, there are third-party menus that have been put up. Someone might have scanned the actual menu. Sometimes they type it into like a Yelp type service or whatever it is. And you have to interact with those people on the phone because they just don't have a sophisticated kind of modern web, interaction capability. So I don't know. I think a lot of people, sure. But I mean, I think a lot of people, when they think of Google, think of all this high-end tech, kind of stuff. And of course that's what they are, but they've created a technology that can go down to the most basic form of communicate. Well, it's not the most basic, but something that we don't think of as technological anymore, like a phone call, where you're just having a natural conversation with a human being. It's very, very interesting. In the future, by the way, what they should be doing is eliminating that conversation altogether, and these AIs could just interact using their own natural whatever it is.
At what point does the AI get frustrated and hang up the phone? That's what I want to see.
That's mine would, and I've always sort of thought like the future of assistance, aside from this kind of thing, which I can't say I ever imagined per se, is this thing where it kind of adapts to the person. And you can come up with these simple examples of that where I should be able to say my own keyword, right? Instead of saying, hey, whatever the name of the assistant is or whatever, I should be able to name it myself, or, maybe it should be able to handle my voice and always know it's me and what the context is. But the thought that these things could become more personalized as well. Like I could picture, I personally, like my assistant having a little bit of an attitude would be enjoyable to me.
Yeah, yeah,
You
me
could
too.
almost, people get lost in these like kind of fantasy worlds. I mean, the notion that you have this AI that's always at your beck and call that you can converse with, I think would be psychologically benefit some people, right? Not just like shut-ins, but people who don't necessarily interact with others a lot because of the nature of their jobs or lives or whatever. Um, I think there's a lot of stuff there that it gets very interesting. And now that you've seen this, I think this is what opens up the possibilities in many people's minds, as to what can be done.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this develops. Now we're not here yet. What time frame do we have for this to become a reality? A year? 6 months?
The
2 years?
thing that we saw exactly, it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah.
They did say that a preview of this technology would come out this summer, and so we'll
Okay,
see what
so
form that takes. I think
give
it's
or
going to be
take.
pretty basic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure, but I'm
compared to what
curious
we saw.
how. I'm curious in real world testing too. With this, I
Well,
mean, it's by far it's extremely impressive. So what I was saying before,
technology
um,
is tough.
you brought up the good example of people that that aren't in the tech, in the tech
Yeah,
ecosystem, in
that's
the
what was
ecosphere.
interesting to me. Like
They
this,
were very
this
interested, but
became aware. The wider world became aware of this.
what was more interesting to me than that was the fact that us as jaded people that we see technology and we're a little critical of it and we'll
Hmm.
find the negative in something like this. People that know about technology, their reaction was, "Oh boy, wow."
Yeah. Yes.
I
Yeah. I mean, right. There are tech enthusiast circles who, and there are people who are impressed by everything, and then there are people
yeah.
who are impressed by nothing because we've seen it all, whatever. But um,
Apple
yeah,
must be
that was impressive.
Apple must be thinking, "Oh boy, this really makes Siri look,
Yeah.
draconian in its methods of
Well,
search and
is
it
it
is."
raining versus make an entire hair appointment with here's the time ranges and the style of thing that I want, and just kind of handling
Yeah.
that, adding it to my calendar.
Yeah.
It's just impressive.
Yeah. What else stood out from the Google I/O thing? So, they also showed off Android P,
Hmm.
and it has gestures. So, what stood
Yeah.
out to you from there?
Well, Android, like you said, I installed that on my phone. I like the gestures, by the way. I like the gestures on the iPhone 10. There's this kind of a thing it's not fair to call it intuitive, but if you've been kind of following along with a product like the iPhone all along, you've kind of become aware or become accustomed to the types of interactions you might have on that kind of a device. And I think when you move forward to an iPhone 10 and it doesn't have that button, once you get over that initial kind of weirdness of that, the gestures that they've provided, I think, make tons of sense. And I think that what Google has done on the Android likewise makes tons of sense. In fact, if anything, it's very much the Android version of the iPhone 10 in the gesture set in the sense that there's more of them. It's slightly more complex because there are more of them, but that's so Android, right? It's kind of the Android thing, and I think that stuff works really well. So I thought that was cool. Android P looks great. Um,
Screenshot
they
editing,
did the
right?
yeah.
That's
There's a
people.
lot of neat
Yeah.
stuff in there. It's that one that looks like a solid release so far.
So
Uh,
we
they always do demos or little updates for their major products. Google Photos is getting something really interesting um, soon, or some several interesting things, I should say. Um, someone I saw this. Someone raised the issue about a year ago. Going to do a feature in Google Photos where it could remove superfluous content from a photo. And so the great
yeah
example of that is you take a picture of a kid hitting a baseball through the chain link
through a
fence,
fence. Yeah.
and what you want to do is eliminate the fence. And that has never actually come out. Like they've never actually released this functionality. This year they did a thing where you can colorize black and white photos that give it that kind of toned down color look of colorized things, which I actually find to be kind of pleasant. You can also do spot color. So if you take a photo that is color, you can make the whole thing black and white, but then maybe your child in the middle of the photo is
Could be a
colorized and the
color.
rest of it isn't,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Um, the Google Photos is excellent. They've always done a great thing. Their new Gmail client, which had actually come out before Google I/O offline mode, is now available on the web directly through the product itself. They talked about the fact that they're moving all of their major web apps to PWAs, which opens up some interesting possibilities, including on Windows 10, by the way, which I think is pretty cool. Google Assistant advances beyond the stuff we talked about in Google Home, of course. It was so much. I mean, Google made a post. In fact, I might.
By the way, to kind of touch on this Google Photo thing, it's able to. What it does is it replicates the surrounding images and it puts it together and it guesses what it's supposed to be. And you could do this in Photoshop. A couple of years ago, Photoshop incorporated. I forgot what they called it, where you could pretty much create a scene like based on what's around it. Yeah, like let's say you wanted to remove the table and the person out, and all you want is the shot. Yeah. You're able to kind of
even remove an entire person.
Yeah, you can remove
maybe
a person.
Maybe there's been a divorce in the family, and you want to eliminate that one person.
You don't have to be like George Costanza, where you steal the photo. So this is great. This is interesting. And this just shows you how far along we've come in the last couple of years when it comes to, the horsepower that these simple photo editing tools, the most editing that I do is on my phone. I don't do it in Photoshop anymore. Yeah. I mean, that's the crazy thing. Between, Snapseed and iPhoto and whatever, Photos, not iPhoto anymore, sorry. Photos and Google Photo, I'm able to get everything done that I need. This is interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know how great it'll be, but it's interesting to see how far along they've come with this. The other thing that was interesting is that they were pushing the lack of notifications to kind of pull back on notifications.
Yeah, well, not just notifications, but really on usage and distractions and all kinds of other things. I mean, one of the big pushes this time around, and it seems like it's designed to get ahead of any potential regulation because they are so dominant that maybe we're being addicted to phones in particular, and we need to have less of that stuff going on. I didn't see any of that in the pre-release build that I installed, so there's a bunch of new features around that that I'm not seeing. But if you're familiar with, night shift, for example, or night mode, or whatever they call it on, it's different things on different OSs. But that thing where they remove the blue light gradually over time as it gets darker and later in the day, and the idea is that it's easier in your eyes and it will help not impact your sleep cycle, whatever. But on top of that, there's also this notion of maybe you shouldn't be using your phone so much, and if it's late at night and you've been sitting there on your phone for 5 hours, maybe it could do something to prevent that, or at least prompt you or whatever. And so one of the weird discoveries that was made over the past, I think fairly recently, over the past year, was that if you take a smartphone and you just make the screen grayscale, people are less apt to sit there and keep looking at it. Like we have this kind of weird, response to like, oh, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And when the thing is not color, it's gray, people do it less. And so one of the things you'll be able to do in Android P is make the screen automatically go grayscale at night as well, in addition to this night mode, whatever it's called. And my wife told me, you can tell when tech is like truly interesting because you'll show it to normal people too. I talked about normal people asking me about the Google thing. I showed my wife last year at Google I/O some of the stuff they announced around the Assistant, I think. And this year I showed her that Google demo and also some of the accessibility stuff because we have a deaf son and we're interested in that stuff. And they're doing some neat stuff there too. But she had told me that she actually tested the grayscale thing, and she actually found that it worked. The issue was that in a handful of the apps that she actually does want to use regularly, like Duolingo, it made too many parts of the screen kind of the same gray, so it made it hard to see stuff. And so she ended up turning it off. But she briefly considered just using her phone like that all the time, just so she wasn't always looking at it.
Interesting.
But I've lost her forever because she turned it off.
She turned it off. A lot of interesting stuff over there. I don't want to. It's old news now. I don't want to do like a whole entire thing, but this is to kind of look at Apple now, right? Google had this announcement, and it really is showing the datedness of a lot of key components in what made the iPhone great. Like the photo application. I thought their Apple Photos was great. It was very well done. It organized it, cataloged it well, and Google has taken, just blew them away over the last 2 years. And the fact that you could do this kind of editing within Google Photos will really take it to another level. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was messaging in Android P. Did they? I didn't hear as much as I would have hoped regarding how they're going to, fix it.
Yeah, they. I don't know why they did this, but ahead of Google I/O, Google made a number of announcements that I think would have fit very nicely into the whole I/O thing, and I maybe they felt like they had too much stuff and they were just trying to spare us from the 3.5 hour keynote or whatever. But one of the announcements that they had made in the week or two before I/O was around messaging, and I think it was The Verge that did someone who wrote about this for The Verge went back and looked at every Google messaging initiative over the years, and there were like 117 of them. Like they've gone in so many completely different directions. And of course, over the past couple of years, that they've introduced new messaging solutions like Allo and what's the other one called? I always think Allo and Vera, whatever the other one is. Of course, they've changed Hangouts many times. They've rebranded it. They've done different things there.
Google Hangouts, yeah.
Yep, there's all kinds of Google messaging stuff. So this year, it looks like what they're doing is basically adding rich messaging capabilities via open standards to MMS, SMS messaging. And so, a lot of people feel like what Google really needs is a straight up iMessage kind of competitor. And Google, I can only imagine there's some kind of hard computer science problem happening here because, they've kind of drunkenly stumbled around, but they are going down a different path again this year. And they didn't really talk about that during the keynote, but I think it was because they announced it ahead of time. And I'm sure there were sessions at the show.
So it's called Chat, the service.
Are you sure?
It's called Chat. I believe so. Yeah, I believe. Okay, so here we go. Okay, you ready?
Honestly.
Actually, The Verge has a pretty interesting timeline here. Okay, August 2005, Google Talk, aka Google Chat. Then in October 2008, Android launched support for Google Talk and SMS. June 2011, Google Plus launched. It included Huddle and Hangouts video chat. August 2011, Facebook Messenger launched as a standalone application. iMessage, okay, then I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, so Google Plus Hangouts launched, merging Google Messages and video chat to one. Google Voice integrated into Hangouts. Project Fi launches, it integrates into Hangouts. Google Messenger becomes the preferred SMS application on Android, ahead of Google Hangouts and texting. Then they launched in May 2016, Google Allo, and then for texting and Duo for video. Google Talk and Android Google Chat in Gmail discontinued. Messenger was renamed to Android Messenger. It was announced that it will be the default RCS app. Then March 2017, Google announced that Hangouts has become Hangouts Chat to focus on enterprise. Google has paused investment in Allo and focused instead on Chat. There is a lot of, maybe stick to one.
Well, that was the thing. I mean, people have been complaining. I've made this complaint that they have too many chat clients, too many different solutions for the same thing. And it wasn't, I don't think it was last year. It must have been 2016. They announced Allo and Duo. And it's like, great, 2 more chat apps. Congratulations. And then they were going to move Hangouts to be more of an enterprise type solution. They rebranded Hangouts at some point. I think the Hangouts Meet. And I just like, whatever. Even the basic, that Android Messages app that you mentioned, which is what I do use on the Pixel 2, is basic, which I'm mostly fine with. But it actually is missing some kind of key features, including the ability to mute a conversation, which can be critical if you ever have, like I do, a bunch of numbnuts in the neighborhood texting each other all day long. And sometimes you just want to turn off the constant bonging of the notification, and you can't. It doesn't support that.
Doesn't.
It's so. I don't know. I have a feeling a year from now we'll be talking about Google I/O 19, and we will still be talking about Google's ever-evolving messaging strategy.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Apple got that totally right.
Yep. Well, they have an insular platform. I mean, it's a little easier. I mean, Google feels like they have to interoperate with the whole world, which I guess they do. So, I'm not giving them a pass, but they do have slightly more difficult concerns to deal with.
Yeah, very interesting. A lot more to talk about, guys. But before we do, I want to take a moment and talk about our sponsor, and that's Simple Contacts. I wear contact lenses, and I've been wearing contact lenses my whole life, essentially. And I hate having to order contact lenses. It's a little bit of a pain. Sometimes you haven't gotten your prescription, right? Or you can't find your prescription. You got to call the wherever you got your eye appointment, and you got to find it. I dread the annual appointment to renew my prescription. That's why I'm super excited to try Simple Contacts. I've been ordering contact lenses since they came on board as an advertiser. My brother orders from them. My wife is now ordering from them. Here's a great thing. It's a great new app that makes it super easy to get your prescription renewal process, and it's super simple. Simple Contacts lets you renew your prescription and reorder your brand of contact lenses from anywhere in minutes. Simple Contacts brings the doctor's office to your home. Now you're asking, how do you do that? The vision test is designed by doctors, and every test is carefully reviewed by a doctor. This is awesome how this works. You could do it on your phone. You could do it on a computer. I did mine on a computer. Simple Contacts offers an amazing selection of every brand of contact lenses that you could imagine, actually. And their prices are hard to beat. They're very competitive. The eye exam is just $20, and they offer free shipping. No, Simple Contacts vision test isn't a replacement for your periodic full eye health exam. So this doesn't replace your eye exam that you should get yearly. I get mine yearly. But this is not a replacement for that. This is just, if you need a new prescription, you can do your vision test from them. The process is super easy. You can do it online. You can do it on the computer. And here's a great offer. You get $30 off your first order at simplecontacts.com/Andrew. And when you enter the promo code Andrew at checkout, that's simplecontacts.com/Andrew, and you can enter the promo code Andrew at checkout. How this works, you go to their website, you can sign up, you can do your vision test, they walk you through the process, and then they review it. And you know how I know someone is reviewing it? I did it wrong twice because I was trying to cut corners, and they said, no, you need to do this again. So I did it again, and they sent me my prescription. It was super easy, super quick. I want to thank Simple Contacts for supporting the show. Again, simplecontacts.com/Andrew. Use the promo code Andrew and get $30 off your first purchase at Simple Contacts. Again, this is not, when you do the eye exam, this does not replace your periodic full health exam for your eyes. This is just, get your prescription. I recommend you go into your eye doctor, though, when you need to get your full eye exam. Let's talk about Build. Paul, what do we learn from Build?
Well, we learned that you should never have a keynote that's 3 hours and 45 minutes long.
Yeah, it was long.
That was a little brutal.
Yeah.
We learned, we were updated on the fact that Windows 10 has been demoted within Microsoft to just be part of what they call Microsoft 365, which is a kind of an all-up Microsoft subscription services for businesses only at this point, although I would imagine at some point it will come to consumers, alongside other things like Office 365 and Microsoft's management security software. And we, again, this isn't so much like, we learned, but I think it was kind of driven home, and we got an update on the fact that, the Microsoft is what they intelligent cloud, intelligent edge thing, meaning cloud services, obviously, things like Azure and Office and Microsoft 365, but on the client side, it's kind of a mix of things that spans a range from these tiny embedded devices like the Azure Sphere OS stuff that we learned about a few weeks ago, all the way up to full-powered PCs like Windows 10 PCs, and everything in between. And the notion of the intelligent edge is just something that has enough processing power on board to do AI and machine learning without having to access the cloud. It doesn't mean they won't access the cloud, but these things can operate independently. And I think that's one of the key, advantages or leaps or whatever you want to say with the Azure Sphere stuff, is that something, he should have the little tiny chip that's like the size of a fingernail, as if no one has ever seen such a thing. But the impressive bit about that was that that processor and the operating system that runs on it is sophisticated enough to do AI, which is, was the big deal there.
A couple other things that I saw. Talk about the app Your Phone and how it syncs Android phones and iPhones to Windows 10. How is that going to work?
Yeah, right now it's more of a theory than a reality. So in in the currently shipping version of Windows 10, there is a phone interface in the settings app. And what it does is connect you. You give it your phone number, and then you really never do anything in that app in the settings app again. But it connects your phone to your Microsoft account, and depending on the type of phone you have, you'll have different capabilities available to you. It works better with Android because Android is open, and Microsoft can do all kinds of stuff there. And so, on Android today, you can send and receive text messages from your phone using your computer, which is useful, but it's also a little bit slow and intermittent. And so what that means is that sometimes the text messages will arrive minutes after they arrived on the phone, and sometimes they don't arrive at all. So
by the way, this is something that I've been talking about for a while. That I've really wanted, and obviously there's workarounds, and you could get applications and different kind of forwarding tools, but this is actually something that Microsoft is integrating, right? And I'm looking at this demo, this mock-up. It looks like iMessage.
Right. I mean, it's tough for Microsoft because they don't own any of the mobile platforms, right? So Google could do this pretty easily between Android and Chrome OS. Apple does this now and has done this for years between the Mac and iPhone, and so that stuff works great. They own the platform; it's easy. Microsoft's opportunities to do this stuff are a lot more limited, really, when you think about it. So, if you have an Android phone with the next version of Windows 10, instead of using that settings app, you'll use the Your Phone app, and it's basically a superset of what's available today. So on Android, that means the messaging thing that I mentioned, integration with the photos that are on the phone, where it's a more seamless way to kind of move those things back and forth. Android today with your PC, and you connect it physically with a USB cable. There's kind of a weird little menu thing you have to do where you tell it, I want this to be the type of connection. It's not just charging. I want to, exchange files. There's no way to permanently set it on that thing, which is infuriating to me. And it's just kind of a manual process. But what this will do is create more of a wireless link between the two. And you don't have to worry about those connection settings. It will just kind of work.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm missing one of the three things. It's photos,
timeline?
Messages. Oh, and timeline.
Yeah.
Maybe. So timeline integration requires you to have Microsoft apps that are compatible with timeline on the phone, right? So if you're using the Microsoft Launcher, which is a kind of a home screen replacement for Android, which not many people do really in the scope of things, you'll get the best kind of timeline synchronization if imaginable between your phone and your PC. If you're not using that launcher, you have to use Microsoft apps like the Office apps, like Cortana, like Microsoft Edge, and then that stuff will integrate through the apps, and that will probably work pretty well. If you're an iPhone, obviously you're not going to get a launcher replacement, so you have to use Microsoft apps. Microsoft Edge will incorporate that stuff for timeline compatibility. But as of right now, the Your Phone app won't be able to do the messaging photos synchronization stuff. Microsoft rather at the show mentioned that they would talk to Apple about this. The way they said it suggested they had never broached this topic with Apple before for some reason. So I wouldn't get my hopes up on the Apple front. I could picture Apple politely nodding their heads and saying, yeah, that's not happening. If not to integrate with their iPhone, they're free to buy a Mac.
I think the messaging is interesting, and I think the timeline is interesting if it works the way that it's supposed to work.
Yep.
You really could have made this simple by making Skype the chat and incorporating everything into that, right? When it came to messaging.
You're not the only one that has observed the fact that Microsoft has owned for many years an excellent messaging service that they've driven right into the ground, and I mean, I don't know what to tell you. One of the original, this is a terrible thing to keep beating the dead horse of this thing, but when they announced Windows Phone back in 2011 or whatever, one of the key features of that OS was that the messaging app would be cross service. So yes, it would do MMS and SMS, but it would also do Skype. And it would also do whatever other messaging services wanted to link into that thing. And it briefly did work that way, by the way. Actually, Facebook Messenger, I think, worked as well very briefly. But that was the end of that, because what happens is third-party services don't want to integrate it into your thing. They want their own app, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the history of that has been written. But, they keep trying. They're cute like that.
By the way, if you use a Mac, Tweetbot 3 came out. Just want to let everybody know.
Do I know? I use
I use Tweetbot all the time.
I use Tweetin on the Mac.
Oh,
which is
you
Eddie's
got to
app.
try Tweetbot. It's great. Very.
Well, I
It's
don't
a
use
very good
I
tool.
don't use the Mac enough to care, but it's okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Paul.
Sorry, I use a real computer editor. That might be cute for you Fisher Price types, but
Actually, talking about a real computer, I'm still waiting for my HP for the Spectre 13.
yeah,
I'm supposed to get it. There was a delay
okay,
apparently, from
okay.
what I was told. There was a delay, and they were trying to figure out what happened. So I really would like
HP
to.
just announced a bunch of new stuff too, by the way,
Yeah, what did
including
they
some
announce? I
Elite.
saw this.
Well, Envy and Elite systems. So these are kind of, well, Envy is like the mid tier on the premium stuff for them. So it's below Spectre for consumers, kind of the value, premium value brand, if that makes sense. And so there's an Envy laptop and Envy 360s, which are nice. They're not as nice as the Spectre, but they're really nice. And then the Elite stuff, from your Elite book experience, that's their business line. And there's some new all-in-ones there. There's some new laptops. I think convertible. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they just announced a bunch of new stuff on Monday.
Interesting. I
A
have
little,
to. Yeah, I
a
saw
little
some
busy.
of it.
I haven't had time. Yeah,
No, I get it. I don't
it
know.
looks good.
It's an interesting time because there's so much happening right now. And Microsoft's. I mean, this is a pivotal shift away from. I mean, we've seen this happen away from Windows as being
Yeah.
their prime focus. But what does this mean for future development of Windows? I mean,
Yep.
the best thing is it continues to grow. It continues to be updated. And you don't
Yeah.
people don't even realize it's being updated and it's just working and new features are implemented. The bad news is
Well,
that's exactly the bad news. There's you just slowly it becomes a
yeah, but
maintenance project for them.
right. I think that is the proper and respectful thing to do for the product and for the people who use it, honestly, because this is where we're at. I always talk about this engagement thing. Microsoft has finally come around to kind of openly agreeing that this is correct, which is that, yeah, there might be 700 million people in Windows 10 and 1 point something billion people overall, but no one's sitting there on a Windows computer looking at little app store things and saying, oh, what other word processor could I use or whatever. We just go there to get work done. So one of the things I just did was I looked at, well, what did they announce at Build about Windows 10? And there were only a handful of things. And what is the focus there compared to some of the kind of consumery kind of nonsense that they announced in past years? And then what have they actually added to this next version of Windows, right? Because if you go back at least 2 months, maybe 3 months, they have been working on the next version of Windows 10 in the open, right, through the Windows Insider program, the release that will be coming out in September or October of 2018. And in some ways, you could almost argue it hasn't slowed down too much, but what has slowed down is the addition of nonsense, right? And that the stuff that they're working on for this release is very much productivity focused. And I really appreciate that. I mean, as a longtime Windows user and fan, I guess, and kind of supporter of the system, I think this is the right direction. So when you look at Timeline, which debuted in this new version of Windows 10, you look at the Timeline improvements that are coming in the next version, and you look at high-level features like Sets, which is this ability to add tabbed interfaces to basically all store apps and many desktop applications, and kind of treat apps like browser tabs, if you want to. It's not required. I think they're kind of on the right track, and so I don't mean to say the demotion of Windows was the best thing that ever happened to it. I don't mean it like that at all, but it's not all negative. And that's true if you actually really care about this stuff. I mean, I know there are kind of enthusiast types out there who are always champing at the bit for new features and so forth, but I think the way they're handling this version is correct. The phone integration stuff is correct. The productivity focus on the product itself is correct. I welcome it. I mean, and with whatever it's worth, I mean, they're doing this transition to this new Fluent design system, which is their new kind of look and feel, modern look and feel that starts with Windows, but it's also going to be applied across their apps on mobile, on the Xbox One, and in other places. And I think that stuff looks great. Like, I actually think they've got a nice design sense going on, that their apps and their interfaces look modern.
Yeah.
Now are starting to. It's not terrible. It's not all bad news.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the shift has happened. I'm just more curious about how it plays in a year from now, 2 years from now. Does Windows become even less of a importance in the grand scheme of things for Microsoft? Do you think that's a direction for them?
Um, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, unfortunately, that is what's been happening, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who, it's like, oh, the Windows was up this quarter, and that part of the company generated X number of revenues, and see everything is fine, and that's kind of a narrow view. There's a natural upgrade cycle that occurs with businesses that will drive some kind of form of revenues. I don't want to call it revenue growth, but whatever revenues for some foreseeable future, and that's fine. It's still a viable business, but really what happens to Windows is that it becomes part of a bigger thing, which we might just call Microsoft, and that it's really just part of the puzzle. The difference between today and the past, or the difference between the past and the future especially, is that in the past, Windows was at the center of the Microsoft's wheel of things, that it was what led to everything else that they did. A lot of the things that went later on to great success at Microsoft, and by the way, a lot of things that failed, would never have existed in the first place if it weren't for Windows. Things like Office or their server product line and servers, and then the cloud, all that stuff. Windows had to succeed for any of that stuff to happen. In the future, actually, I don't know, maybe we didn't have this conversation. I came up with what I think is a neat way to describe this. Remember when Apple demoted the Mac in their digital hub strategy? The Mac used to be the center of the digital hub. Then they pushed it out to be one of the spokes. And the thing at the center now is the cloud. And that's what Microsoft did to Windows. Windows used to be at the center for everything Microsoft. And now it's just one of the things, it's just a spoke. It's one of the many things that they do, but it's no longer at the center. It doesn't drive, Windows innovation doesn't drive other businesses anymore. That's the difference. You're never going to add something to Windows that will become Microsoft's next $1 billion. It's not the center.
But it doesn't
mean that
right?
It doesn't exist. That's the point. I mean, the company has matured as the market has evolved, right? If they hadn't matured in the way that they did, if they had left Windows at the center, and if they had kind of gone down this delusional path where you never know, maybe Windows mixed reality is the future of the company, or maybe, whatever, the Microsoft would be going out of business, right? So they've moved in what I think is kind of a pragmatic and logical way to embrace the reality of the situation. It doesn't mean Windows is like failure. This is Windows drove revenue growth at Microsoft for over 20 years. I mean, that was one of the craziest success stories in the history of personal technology, but the market has evolved, and so Microsoft is evolving with it.
Yeah, I mean, right now, you know what it seems like? Every company, it's a very, it's spread out. Everybody's trying everything. You see with, they're attempting to kind of centralize everything, but they're really spreading it out. Like, look at Google's initiative. Google is, I don't know what their priorities at this point. You look at Apple. And you see the mistakes that Apple is making. Microsoft is at least realizing and saying, listen, Windows is not our driving force for revenue at this point. We have Azure, we have cloud computing, we have business services, obviously enterprise is their focus, but it's fascinating how everybody has kind of shifted over the last, 3 to 4 years. Every company. Maybe not Apple. Right? Would you say Apple has shifted?
No, but they will. They'll have to.
They'll have
Google,
to.
Google has one dominant product, and it is search. And I'm sorry, it's advertising, which is driven by search. Apple has one dominant product, which is the iPhone. These things act like Windows did for Microsoft. They drive everything else that they do. Google can get into 1,000 different markets because they make so many in advertising. Are services that would not be sustainable as standalone businesses. They have this other thing to make it work. That's what Apple is doing right now. When you look at Apple's growth markets, which are basically services, they're because people own iPhones and they're spending more money on services now. That's all that is. The success of the Apple Watch will always be secondary, tertiary to the fact that those people have to own an iPhone first. That's the only reason you buy an Apple. You can't even think about an Apple Watch until you own an iPhone. The iPhone is the center of everything at Apple.
Yeah.
Look, it's super successful. Apple is literally the richest, most successful company in the world. Criticizing them is kind of ludicrous. But the fact remains that is untenable. Like, this is not something that's going to last forever. That said, it could last for a long time. Windows lasted for 20 years. I mean, I would say, 15 years of those were, upside or whatever. It wasn't always grow, grow, grow. But they had lots of mistakes and lots of things that failed off of Windows as well. Google is interesting because they're on the start of the curve. Apple, I bet, is a percentage of revenue, direct iPhone, and especially direct and non-direct iPhone revenues, are increasingly a bigger part of their total picture. So they're still on hitting the upside part of it. Google's already on the other side of the curve. It's just early. So not too long ago, you could look at Google's revenues at the time, now Alphabet's, and what you would see is that 95 and then 92 and then 90, whatever the percentage was ad revenue related. If you look at I don't remember the figure from the most recent quarter, but it was in the 80% range, or maybe even the 70s. I don't remember, but the percentage of revenues that Google collects from ads, even though the amount has gone up, as a percentage of total revenues has actually gone down. And that means that some of these other things are starting to make some money. It doesn't matter that they wouldn't exist if it weren't for the ads. If they can get them to the point where these things are self-sustaining, that's the goal, right? And so their enterprise product line, G Suite and so forth, is small compared to Microsoft. It may literally be 1/8 or 1/10 the size of Office 365. I can't remember the exact figure, but it is earning revenues, right? They have customers, lots of customers, and so it's growing. Like, Google, no company wants to be a one-hit wonder. The market is going to move on at some point, and you need to be ready for that. So Microsoft's making that shift now. Google will be making that shift, is trying to make that shift. Apple will have to make that shift too. Eventually, this AI stuff we were talking about, this could make phones go away. This could make phones superfluous.
Yeah.
Eventually, the ambient computing, that whole movement might make the notion of you having to carry a thing that drains battery all day in your pocket seem really old-fashioned really quickly.
I'm going to tell you, walking down Manhattan and seeing everybody like this is going to be a problem. This is going to be something they look back, 30, 40, 50 years from now and say, I cannot believe that's what they did. This is equivalent to that giant New York Times people reading on the subway. And you look back, 10 years from now, even now, you see someone reading the New York Times, and they're wrapping and they're folding it a certain way. And you look at me like, wow, this guy's still reading it like that. This is what this is going to become. This is not a natural way to live with this thing like this. Everything evolves. Everything changes.
Can you not hear me?
Now I can.
You could. I don't have a picture of it in my mind, but I bet you could very easily find an old-timey photo of people on a subway in the 1930s or something smoking, yeah. like a subway full of smoke. And you look at that today and you think, what the hell were those people thinking? How could they not know how terrible this is? And that's what's going to happen with a similar time frame when we look back on people at the dinner table all huddled around their stupid phones.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
No doubt about it.
We're in an interesting time. It's an evolutionary state, constantly changing. Things are constantly happening. Paul, It is time to wrap up. I know you have a bunch of interviews you got to do today.
Yeah.
You got a busy day. I hope you enjoyed this little break that you got.
I so rarely don't want it to end, but I so desperately do not want to go down there. But yeah,
I know. For all things Paul, go to Thurrott.com. Go check out all the articles. You guys have been working extra hard. Brad wrote a very interesting Thurrott premium piece about flying and why he chose to drive over 1,000 miles. And I have to tell you, I read it. I got feedback from people that read and they said, wow, I relate to him. And I relate to Brad in this. Because I have to tell you, there was a quick story before we wrap up. I was flying. I was about to fly to LA one time. And I had a 6-something flight and everything went wrong in that morning. My alarm didn't go off. My Uber, and I rushed and I did this and I did that. And at the last second, I left I left something. I forgot. I think it was my charger on the on the chair that I was sitting on waiting to board. I was in line, and I remember I left my charger. I got off the line, and I went to get the charger, and I said, you know what? I'm not doing this. I couldn't do it.
I'm leaving.
I said, it's not meant to be. It's not meant to be. And I got back in the car, and I went home. I flew the following week. I totally understand the, when you get to that point.
Brad flies a lot. And
I know he does.
We've talked about this over the years. He's very skittish about things like turbulence and so forth. I mean, I was on a plane one time where the plane dropped out of the air and the stewardess flew up and hit the ceiling and the drinks went flying everywhere. And, I still kind of fly. I still fly, obviously. I think part of it might be he is a small child. I will say that when my children were small, I went through a year or two where I had very vivid, repeated nightmares about airplane crashes and things like there might be something to that. But, I told him this privately, and maybe we'll talk about it on a podcast sometime. But when I found out this had happened, I said, Brad, all you had to do was call me. I would have driven home with you.
Yeah.
We could have turned it into like a buddy road movie, and he understood that, but I think it was just something he kind of had to work out privately or something. But I think the hard thing for me is just that it's not that this happens and that he has this problem. It's fine. We all have our demons, as he says. It's that there are people who care about him who would help, and I was there. I would have helped. And I feel bad that I wasn't given the opportunity to show up, and who knows, maybe I would have failed terribly, but I'd like to think that I would have done the right thing for him. And I just wish I had been given the chance. I feel bad about that because I would have, I think I would have, I'm saying I would have, I'm positive I would have, but I would have liked to have helped.
Yeah, no, I get it. I totally do. I wanted to bring that up before we wrapped up. Guys, that's it for this week. We'll see you all next time. Take care.